The crystal spires of Vilethara stretched toward 3 crimson suns, their surfaces gleaming with the same scales that covered the mighty Draconic Empire's citizens. Within the highest tower, Lord Commander Zephyros folded his massive wings and gazed down at the courtyard where his youngest son practiced combat drills. The sight filled him with disappointment that burned hotter than dragon fire. Kyrian stumbled again, his small frame barely able to lift the ceremonial training blade. Unlike his older siblings who breathed flames that could melt steel at age 5, Kyrian's fire barely flickered like a dying candle. His scales, instead of the proud crimson or gold of their bloodline, remained a dull gray that marked him as defective in their warrior culture. "Pathetic," muttered General Thane, Zephyros's chief advisor. "The boy brings shame to your house, my lord. Perhaps it would be merciful to send him to the outer colonies where no one knows his lineage." Other dragon nobles gathered in the courtyard whispered similar sentiments. Prince Kyrian was weak, broken, unworthy of his father's name. Some suggested darker solutions that made Zephyros's claws extend involuntarily. Yet even he struggled to find pride in a son who couldn't even achieve basic flight, whose wings trembled with exhaustion after mere minutes in the air. The training session ended with Kyrian collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath while his instructor shook his horned head in disgust. The other young dragons snorted with amusement, small puffs of flame escaping their nostrils as they laughed at the prince's weakness. Kyrian's eyes, usually bright amber like his mother's, dimmed with humiliation. That evening, Zephyros paced his private chambers, torn between duty to his empire and love for his son. The Council of Scales had grown impatient with Kyrion's lack of progress. Dragons were meant to be apex predators, rulers of the stars through strength and fire. A weak air threatened the stability they had built across 17 star systems. "My lord," came a soft voice from the doorway. Sarah Chen, the human custodian, stood with cleaning supplies in hand. Her species had been integrated into dragon society as servants and maintenance workers after their homeworld had been conquered decades ago. Most dragons barely acknowledged human existence, considering them useful but unremarkable creatures. "Enter," Zephyros rumbled, surprised by his willingness to speak with the small human woman. Sarah had tended to the palace for 3 years, always quiet and efficient. She possessed an unusual quality among the humans he had encountered. She never showed fear in his presence, only respectful attention. Sarah began dusting the ornate furniture with practiced movements. "Forgive me for speaking out of turn, my lord, but I couldn't help noticing young Prince Kyrian during today's training." Zephyros's eyes narrowed. Had even the human servants begun to mock his son? "Speak your mind, but choose your words carefully." "The prince shows signs of respiratory distress that I recognize from my medical training before the integration," Sarah said, her voice gentle but confident. "His breathing patterns, the way he favors his left side, the exhaustion after minimal exertion, these aren't signs of weakness, my lord. They suggest a treatable condition." The massive dragon turned to study the small human woman more carefully. "You claim medical knowledge?" Sarah nodded, setting down her cleaning cloth. "Before our worlds joined the Empire, I served as a pediatric specialist in human medicine. I've seen similar symptoms in young children. With proper treatment, they often go on to live completely normal, healthy lives." Zephyros felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he had almost forgotten when it came to Kyrian. Hope. "Explain this condition." "From what I observed, the prince may have a form of congenital airway restriction. It would explain why his fire production is limited and why flight exhausts him so quickly. His lungs simply aren't receiving adequate oxygen flow." Sarah spoke with growing confidence, her fear of contradicting dragon medical wisdom overcome by genuine concern for the young prince. "Our healers have examined him thoroughly," Zephyros replied, though doubt crept into his voice. Dragon medicine focused on enhancing natural abilities rather than correcting perceived defects. Weakness was something to be overcome through discipline and willpower, not treated like a disease. Respectfully, my lord, human medicine approaches respiratory issues differently than dragon healing. We've developed techniques specifically for correcting airway problems in developing children. What your healers see as irreversible weakness might be completely treatable. The Lord Commander studied Sarah's earnest expression. Humans were known for their adaptability and unusual problem-solving approaches. Their integration into the Empire had brought unexpected innovations in technology and logistics. Perhaps their medical knowledge held similar untapped potential. "You would risk your life on this assessment?" Zephyros asked, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "If you are wrong, if you give me false hope about my son's condition, the consequences will be severe." Sarah straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "I would risk everything to help that child, my lord. No young one should suffer when treatment exists." That night, Zephyros found himself in the palace gardens where Kyrian often retreated after particularly difficult training sessions. The young dragon sat beside a fountain, his small frame hunched with defeat. Starlight reflected off scales that should have gleamed with pride, but instead seemed to absorb darkness. "Father?" Kyrian looked up in surprise. Private conversations between them had grown rare as disappointment built walls between father and son. "Tell me about your breathing, my son. When did you first notice difficulty?" Kyrian's expression grew cautious. "I have always struggled, father. Master Corvin says it shows weakness of spirit, that I must overcome it through determination." Zephyros settled beside his son, his massive form carefully controlled to avoid intimidation. "What if I told you there might be another explanation? That your struggles might have a cause beyond weakness?" Hope flickered in Kyrian's amber eyes before quickly fading. "The healers have said I am simply inferior to my brothers and sister. That some dragons are born without proper fire or flight. Human medicine suggests otherwise," Zephyros said carefully, watching his son's reaction. Kyrian's head tilted with curiosity. "Humans know of dragon medicine? They know of healing in ways we may not have considered. Sarah, the custodian, believes your condition might be treatable." For the first time in months, Kyrian's scales showed hints of brighter color as excitement stirred within him. "She thinks I could be fixed? That I could fly properly and breathe fire like my siblings?" Zephyros felt his own hope growing as he watched his son's transformation. "It is possible. But it would require trusting human healing methods, something our people have never attempted." Kyrian stood quickly, his young voice filled with desperate determination. "I would try anything, father. Anything to prove I am worthy of our family name." The Lord Commander rose as well, decision crystallizing in his mind. "Then tomorrow we will speak with Sarah about this treatment. But you must understand, if we pursue this path, there will be opposition from the council and other nobles. They will see it as admitting weakness, as lowering ourselves to seek help from our servants." "I do not care what others think," Kyrian declared with more fire than his father had seen from him in years. "If there is a chance to become strong, to make you proud, I will take it regardless of the cost." Looking down at his son's determined expression, Zephyros felt something he had nearly given up, genuine pride in Kyrian's courage. Perhaps true strength lay not in natural ability, but in the willingness to fight against impossible odds for a chance at greatness. The next morning would bring challenges that would test everything they thought they knew about strength, healing, and the unexpected wisdom that could come from the most unlikely sources. Dawn brought whispers through the crystal corridors of the palace as news spread of Lord Commander Zephyros's unprecedented request. The ruler of 17 star systems had summoned a human servant to his private study to discuss his heir's condition. Such a breach of protocol sent shockwaves through the rigid hierarchy of Dragon Society. Sarah stood before the massive Dragon Lord, medical texts from her personal collection spread across his obsidian desk. These books, smuggled from Earth decades ago and carefully preserved, contained knowledge that no dragon healer possessed. Beside her, Kyrian watched with hopeful eyes as his father examined the strange human symbols and diagrams. "These images show internal structures I do not recognize," Zephyros rumbled, pointing at anatomical drawings with one razor-sharp claw. "How do humans see inside living bodies without causing death?" Sarah's confidence grew as she entered her area of expertise. "We developed imaging technologies that use sound waves and electromagnetic radiation to create pictures of internal organs. These allow us to diagnose problems without invasive surgery." She pointed to a specific diagram. "This shows a condition called laryngomalacia, when the airway structures are too soft and collapse during breathing." Kyrian leaned forward, fascinated despite his inability to read human script. "That matches how I feel when trying to breathe fire, as if something closes off inside my throat." "Exactly," Sarah said, her excitement building. "The symptoms you describe, the breathing difficulty, reduced fire capacity, exhaustion during flight, all point to this condition. In humans, it's often corrected with a relatively simple procedure that reinforces the airway structures." The study door burst open without ceremony, causing Sarah to step back instinctively. General Thane strode in, accompanied by High Healer Vaximus, whose ancient scales bore the gold markings of the medical caste. Their expressions radiated disapproval and barely contained anger. "My lord," Thane's voice carried dangerous undertones, "surely you do not seriously consider allowing this human to interfere with dragon healing practices?" Vaximus's eyes glowed with indignation. "The suggestion that our methods are inferior to primitive human techniques borders on blasphemy. Prince Kyrian suffers from weak bloodline inheritance, not some imaginary human disease." Sarah felt the familiar weight of dismissal she had experienced countless times since the conquest. Humans were seen as clever in their own limited way, but ultimately inferior to dragon knowledge and abilities. The idea that they might possess superior understanding in any field challenged the fundamental beliefs of the Empire. "Explain your diagnosis, healer," Zephyros commanded, though his tone suggested growing impatience with traditional approaches. Vaximus straightened to his full imposing height. "The prince lacks proper flame gland development and wing muscle density. These are hereditary deficiencies that occur in roughly 1% of dragon births. No amount of human tinkering can alter genetic destiny." Sarah took a careful breath before speaking. "Respectfully, High Healer, have your examinations included detailed analysis of the prince's airway structure? The condition I'm describing affects the ability to draw proper breath, which would naturally impact both flame production and flight endurance." "Dragons do not suffer from breathing problems," Vaximus replied dismissively. "We are apex aerial creatures. Our respiratory systems are flawless by design." Kyrian's voice, small but determined, broke the tense silence. "But what if I am not flawless? What if something is wrong that could be fixed?" The High Healer's expression softened slightly when addressing the young prince directly. "My lord, you must accept your limitations and find other ways to serve the Empire. Not all dragons are meant for combat and conquest." "With respect," Sarah interjected, "that assumes the limitations are permanent. Human medicine has successfully treated this condition in thousands of children. They go on to live completely normal lives with full respiratory function." General Thane's patience evaporated. "Enough. My lord, this human presumes too much. She seeks to experiment on the royal heir with untested alien procedures. The risk to Prince Kyrian is unacceptable." Zephyros looked between his advisors and the small human woman who stood her ground, despite the overwhelming opposition. What would this treatment involve, Sarah? Speak plainly about the risks and procedures. Sarah pulled out detailed surgical illustrations, her voice steady despite the hostile audience. The procedure involves creating small supports for the collapsed airway structures. In human children, it's done through minimally invasive surgery with extraordinary success rates. Recovery typically takes 2 to 3 weeks. And if something goes wrong? Thane demanded. If your primitive techniques harm the prince? All surgery carries risks, Sarah admitted honestly. But the alternative is allowing a treatable condition to limit his potential for life. The greater risk lies in doing nothing. Kyrion stepped forward, his young voice carrying unexpected authority. I wish to try the human treatment. Shocked silence filled the room. Dragon children, especially royal heirs, were expected to obey their elders without question. Kyrion's declaration of personal choice challenged protocols as much as Sarah's medical suggestions. You are too young to make such decisions, Vaximus stated firmly. The council must consider. The council will debate until my son reaches maturity, Zephyros interrupted, his voice carrying the finality of absolute rule. Sarah, you claim knowledge of this procedure. Do you possess the skill to perform it yourself? Sarah hesitated for only a moment. I would need to study dragon anatomy more thoroughly, but yes. The principles are identical to human treatment. With proper preparation and equipment, I could attempt the procedure. My lord, this is madness. Thane's composure cracked completely. You would risk your heir's life on the word of a conquered servant species? Zephyros rose to his full magnificent height, wings spreading slightly in a display of dominance. I risk my son's future on continued failure, or I trust in the demonstrated adaptability and innovation that humans have brought to our empire. The choice is clear. He turned to Sarah with an expression that mixed hope with fierce paternal protection. You will have 3 days to prepare. Study our anatomy texts. Gather whatever equipment you require. If you truly believe you can help my son, then we will attempt this healing. Sarah bowed deeply, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. I will not fail him, my lord. Or you. As the meeting dispersed, Kyrion approached Sarah with shining eyes. When I am healed, I will remember who helped me when no one else believed. Sarah smiled at the earnest young dragon. Just focus on getting better. That will be reward enough. Later that evening, alone in her modest quarters, Sarah opened her preserved medical texts and began planning the most important surgery of her life. Dragon anatomy was similar enough to human structure that the procedure should work, but the differences were significant enough to require careful adaptation. 3 days to save a prince and prove that human compassion and ingenuity deserved respect in this vast empire. 3 days to show that strength came not just from fire and flight, but from the willingness to heal and hope. Outside her window, the 3 suns set behind crystal spires as Sarah worked through the night, driven by determination that had carried humanity through conquest and integration. Tomorrow would test whether human medicine could succeed where dragon healing had failed. The makeshift surgical suite in the palace's medical wing hummed with tension as Sarah completed her final preparations. Dragon medical equipment, designed for their massive physiology, had been carefully modified with human precision tools she had requested from the engineering corps. The fusion of 2 medical traditions created something entirely new, a hybrid approach that honored both species' knowledge. Prince Kyrion lay unconscious on the surgical table, his small frame looking even more fragile under the bright surgical lighting. Sarah had spent the previous night studying dragon respiratory anatomy through texts provided by a reluctantly cooperative high healer Vaximus. The basic structure matched her expectations, but the scale differences and unique flame gland connections required careful navigation. Lord Commander Zephyros stood at the observation window, his massive claws leaving scratch marks in the reinforced crystal. as anxiety overwhelmed his usual composure. General Thane and other council members flanked him, their skepticism evident in every whispered comment about the unprecedented situation unfolding below. "Beginning initial incision," Sarah announced to the recording devices that would document this historic moment. Her voice remained steady despite the enormous pressure. 3 days of preparation had led to this critical hour, where human medical knowledge would either prove its worth or end in tragedy. The scaled skin parted under her modified laser scalpel with surprising ease. Dragon physiology, while different in scale and complexity, responded well to human surgical techniques. Sarah worked methodically, following the path she had mapped through countless study sessions, avoiding the flame gland connections that could permanently damage Kirian's fire-breathing ability. "Airway structures visible," she reported, excitement creeping into her professional tone. The anatomical texts had been accurate. Kirian's laryngeal cartilage showed the exact malformation she had expected. The supporting structures were underdeveloped and collapsed inward, severely restricting airflow just as she had diagnosed. High Healer Vaximus, despite his earlier opposition, found himself leaning forward with fascination. "The structural weakness is clearly visible," he admitted grudgingly. "Our scanning methods focus on flame gland development rather than airway support systems." Sarah carefully positioned the biocompatible supports she had designed, tiny devices that would reinforce the weakened cartilage without interfering with natural dragon growth. The materials, adapted from both human and dragon medical supplies, represented the best of both civilizations' technological achievements. "Supports in place and secure," Sarah announced after delicate work that required microscopic precision. "Testing airway expansion." She gently inflated Kirian's lungs through the surgical apparatus, watching as the previously collapsed structures maintained their proper shape for the first time in the young dragon's life. The change was immediately visible even to untrained observers. Kirian's chest rose and fell with an ease that had never existed before. The labored breathing that had marked his entire existence was replaced by smooth, natural respiratory rhythm. "By the eternal flames," whispered one council member, his skepticism evaporating as he witnessed the transformation. The human was correct. Sarah began closing the incision with the same methodical care she had shown throughout the procedure. Surgery complete. All structures intact and functioning properly. The prince should experience immediate improvement in breathing capacity with full benefits apparent within 2 weeks as healing completes. As if responding to her words, Kirian's eyes fluttered open. The sedation was wearing off naturally, and his first conscious breath drew gasps of amazement from the observers. The young dragon's chest expanded easily, drawing air with an efficiency he had never experienced. "Father." Kirian's voice, though weak from surgery, carried a clarity that had been impossible before. The struggle that had marked his every word was gone. Zephyros rushed into the surgical suite, his massive form moving with surprising gentleness as he approached his son. "How do you feel, my boy?" Kirian tested his breathing, wonder growing in his amber eyes. "Different. Better. I can breathe without fighting for air." He looked at Sarah with gratitude that needed no words. "The human healer has given me what our own medicine could not." High Healer Vaximus approached the surgical table with newfound respect. "Sarah Chen," he said formally, using her name for the first time. "Your techniques have achieved what we believed impossible. I request permission to study your methods and integrate them into our healing practices." Sarah smiled tiredly, the enormous stress of the procedure finally catching up with her. "I would be honored to share this knowledge, High Healer. Medical advancement benefits everyone." Over the following weeks, Kirian's recovery exceeded all expectations. The young dragon's lung capacity increased dramatically as his airways remained properly open for the first time. His first successful flame, produced on the 10th day after surgery, burned bright blue and hot enough to melt steel, a fire worthy of royal bloodline. Even more remarkable was his flight development. Without the constant struggle for adequate oxygen, Kirion's wing strength improved rapidly. His first sustained flight lasted 3 hours, a duration that would have been impossible before the surgery. The transformation was so complete that dragons who had previously scorned the weak prince now sought his favor, recognizing future strength in his recovery. The political implications rippled throughout the empire as word spread of the human custodian who had succeeded where dragon medicine had failed. Other dragon nobles quietly began consulting human medical specialists for conditions that traditional healing had deemed permanent. The rigid hierarchy that placed dragon knowledge above all others began showing cracks as practical results trumped ancient prejudices. Sarah found herself appointed as the first human medical advisor to the Dragon High Council, a position created specifically to acknowledge her contributions. The integration of human and dragon healing techniques led to medical breakthroughs that benefited both species, creating a new field of cooperative medicine that drew the best from both civilizations. Cheiron, now breathing easily and flying with growing skill, never forgot the human woman who had believed in him when others saw only failure. As he grew stronger and more confident, he began advocating for greater human participation in imperial society, arguing that diversity of knowledge and perspective made the empire stronger rather than weaker. Lord Commander Zephyros watched his son's transformation with pride that extended beyond physical healing. Cheiron had learned compassion and humility through his struggles, qualities that would make him a better leader than pure strength alone ever could. The experience had taught them all that wisdom could come from unexpected sources, and that true power lay in the willingness to embrace new possibilities. Years later, when Prince Cheiron took his father's place as ruler of the Dragon Empire, his first decree established formal equality between human and dragon citizens. His personal experience had proven that every species possessed unique gifts, and that cooperation produced results that no single group could achieve alone. Sarah, now elderly but still sharp, served as his closest advisor on matters requiring both medical knowledge and diplomatic insight. The weak child, who had been overlooked by all, had become a powerful leader who valued strength of character over strength of flame, and the human custodian who had risked everything to help him had found her place in history as the healer who changed an empire. The crystal spires of Vale Thara still reached toward the 3 crimson suns, but now they gleamed with the reflected light of cooperation between species rather than the cold fire of domination. And in the highest tower, a dragon emperor who breathed freely, ruled with wisdom, learned from a human teacher who had seen potential where others saw only weakness.